Light and dark have formed the motion that creates all time and all events and all history and everything that will ever be in the present framework of reality. If light is the birth of life, then darkness is the placenta that it lived within until it was born. No placenta and no life. Darkness is equally responsible for everything that is created. Conventional human understanding states that darkness is not an entity in and of itself, but simply the absence of light. Can you imagine that? We can build a quantum computer and we can build a super collider, but we can't get the basics of light and dark right. Darkness is in fact an entity. It can speak. It has a language. It can host life. It's a form of consciousness. It has its own consciousness. It has its own purpose in creation. It's a created thing. It's not the absence of creation, but for we human beings, it's still the superstitious repository of all our ignorance. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or actually good evening. It's 5:56 p.m., Friday, May 3rd. And I thought that I would do another podcast on 1947. I've been a little lax, but here we go nonetheless. So let's recap what we talked about in the preceding 4 parts of this series. 1947 is an absolutely unbelievable year. Okay? It's when all the European Jews went over to Israel to commence the fighting, to seize the part of the country they wanted from the Palestinians, to take their homes, to murder them. Okay? This was allowed to happen, of course, under the cloud of the tremendous guilt of the Christian world, Western Christendom, Europe, which had allowed these people to be almost exterminated in Europe, as the story goes. Concentration camps, degradation, theft of property, experimentation on twins, all kinds of vile stuff. It was very difficult in that context for the public to raise any moral argument with what Israel wanted to do. They were at that time in history, in the public mind, lucky to be alive, and one of the most decimated and targeted populations of the Second World War. That's not to minimize the sacrifice of other people in other countries, nor is it to minimize the 8 million German lives lost in the Holocaust perpetrated after the war, where Germans were horribly treated. About 8 million died in concentration camps. So, in a sense, if you wanted to be very hard-nosed about this, you could say that the debt was paid. Blood for blood. But the sympathy equity that the Jewish world has been able to mine in the Gentile consciousness, and specifically Western consciousness and Christian consciousness, has been extraordinary. We're going on 80 years now, 79 years, and to this day, there's still TV, documentaries, and cinema being made about or referencing the Holocaust. That's really quite something when you think about it. So Israel is the lead story in 1942. Ancillary to that is Roswell and the beginning of the UFO narrative, and subsequent to that was the revelation that an alien-human hybrid had been created in the form of Cynthia Crawford. Now, all of these things you can look into more deeply on your own. You just need to stop the podcast, do a Google search, find some information, put it aside, look at it after you're done the podcast. Everything I'm telling you can be verified with research. As to the veracity of the stories, I leave that to the total discernment of your being, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. What do you think of these stories? Now, extremely interesting in the Roswell story is the apprehension of a live extraterrestrial, Errol, and the transmission of information from Errol to Matilda, the military secretary who was chosen to communicate with her, chosen by Errol. Of all the available personalities, Errol was chosen to telepathically communicate with. Matilda. Errol chose Matilda, a secretary, not a colonel, not a major, not a general, not a bigwig in the OSS or the CIA, which was being formed that year as well. If you want to understand the impact of Roswell, the best book to read is The Day After Roswell by an author by the name of Corso. His last name is Corso. I can't remember what his first name is. You'll have to excuse me. It's a very important book to read for understanding the metaphysical history of the 20th century, which is so compelling about the UFO narrative is that the metaphysical and the physical fuse. Metaphysical is non-physical, but there's a physics to it, a law to it. So this would be the non-physical dual worlds, the worlds that are replicas or copies or facsimiles of this physical reality, which is the slowest reality, the most condensed reality, the material reality. It's no accident that Stephen Greer went from talking about alien recovery and craft recovery to Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, in which he introduces the ability of human consciousness to interact with extraterrestrial life. Interesting migration. The vast majority of people who are going to have experiences with extraterrestrials will be having them internally. They will be an internal experience. The physical can also come about after you get accustomed to the internal visitations. But generally it begins with the internal. Now that's very interesting because our internal lives have always been the province of religious narratives. And other than human beings, the religious narratives give us in the West a very, very narrow band of life. We're given several classes of angels, archangels, seraphim, cherubim, all forms of extraterrestrial. Let's start making the case.
Billy Meier is a soon-to-be 7-year-old man living in Switzerland. He claims that his first contacts with extraterrestrials took place when he was only a 5-year-old boy. I personally showed Meier's UFO photos and films to the owners of the company that won the Academy Award for Special Effects. When I asked them if these were models, these photos and films, they said, no. I asked, can you duplicate Meier's films? And they said, if we could, we'd have to go to CGI in 1976, 78. There was no Photoshop, no CGI.
I once made recordings of the whirring sounds of Semyaze's beam ship.
8 different sound engineers had the opportunities to analyze the sounds. They could find no sound source of record that could produce these sounds. Billy Meyer is a soon-to-be 70-year-old man.
Billy Meyer. Okay, why is Billy Meyer important? Well, Billy Meyer is one of the early UFO narratives. He is a contactee, and he's a Pleiadian contactee. Now, that's not a huge deal now in the exopolitical environment we live in 2024. But at the time Billy came out in the 70s, it was a big deal. It was a very big deal, actually. What's even more interesting and what separates Billy's UFO interactions from all the other ones is that Billy Meyer and his team are claiming that the Pleiadians who tutored or interacted with or mentored or gave downloads to, however you want to look at it, Billy Meyer, were in fact the same race of beings that inspired the biblical prophets. That's a bold statement. So Isaiah is Pleiadian. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I believe, are Pleiadian influenced. Okay? Very interesting when you think about it. Jesus is alleged to be the first alien-human hybrid, according to the Billy Meyer material, preceding Cynthia Crawford by some 1,950 years. Billy says that the man known as Yeshua, Jesus Christ, was the product of a human woman and a Pleiadian Ishwish, where the Ishwish is the Pleiadian definition of a holy man. So an advanced spiritual being in Pleiadian culture. What does Scripture tell us? Scripture tells us that the Archangel Gabriel impregnated Mary, the same archangel who visited Muhammad in the cave. Billy Meyer is saying it was a Pleiadian Ishwish. Billy Meyer would then be, by logical conclusion, and they come right out and pretty much say this in their own material, Billy would be the last Pleiadian voice in the human record, the last prophet, if you will, in this line of prophets. He makes a lot of prophecies himself. He wrote them down. You can get the book online, The Enochian Prophecies by Billy Meyer. He's like 97% accurate. It's really quite remarkable. He seems to have inherited this prophetic ability, which is the hallmark of the Abrahamic teachings. There's no other spiritual system on earth that uses prophecy, which is the prediction of the future, as told to the prophet by God. There's no other system of spiritual teaching on the planet that uses prophecy as the fulcrum to leverage public consent to the teachings. Taoists don't do it. The Sikhs don't do it. The Buddhists don't do it. Hindus don't do it. Christians don't do it. Christ is the beginning and the end for the Christians, but Protestant Christianity goes much more into the Torah. Bit of a plan there, I think. One of the predictions that Billy made was that in the early 21st century, there was a chance that the United States would attack Iran. And if in fact they did attack Iran, they would be subsequently wiped out by a joint nuclear attack from China and Russia. I believe this prophecy was made in about 1973 and was passed to numerous government figures all over the world. Billy did this. He mailed his prophecies to people. He mailed them to the White House, so the Carter White House would have received the Meyer prophecies. Now, at the time he made the predictions, I don't even believe it was public knowledge that China had nuclear weapons. I don't think they had nuclear weapons in 1973 or thereabouts. They certainly didn't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. So how was he able to so accurately predict what might be happening in the early 21st century? It's a mystery. And there's a lot of this mystery attending Billy Meyer. But it's not a mystery. He's simply telling the truth. The Abrahamic scriptures are in large measure the Palladian tutelage of the human race. Plain and simple. Okay? So the Palladians alleged to be responsible for 3 lines of humanity on the planet. The brown race, which is the Arabic race, including the Jews. The white race, which would be the Northern Europeans. I suppose Southern Europeans as well, because they're a mix of Arabic and European. And the red men, which would be the global native population. And when you study the Palladian material, there are in fact Palladian cultures that are native. The Pleiades are a star system with many planets and many different kinds of people. But we were seeded here. We were seeded here. I do not believe that the Celtic people are part of this. I believe we're a separate entity. I believe our seed race was the Tuatha De Danann, the Irish gods. The Greeks are a different people. Those gods really existed. You could consider them extraterrestrials. Fantastical as it sounds, it's all true. Now, the curious thing about 1947 is in the history and the events, it is an intersection between the UFO narrative, which the Abrahamic scriptures have secretly always been, and the religious narrative of Israel, which of course is leading to the Third Temple of Solomon. Okay? What is the Temple of Solomon? We need to know this, okay? Let's take a look, see if we can figure it out.
So there's something odd about all of us. I presume that you're not a vegetarian and I'm not a vegetarian. I'm just going to assume that. But as it turns out, although we eat meat, we don't slaughter our own animals. Okay? I'm going to even push this further. Because of refrigeration, animal slaughter takes place usually very far away, and people don't come into contact with the animals that they eat. You go to the store and you buy a piece of chicken. It's all wrapped up, a piece of meat. And I'll say it even further. I would say most people who live in that type of society would feel very uncomfortable if one of their animals was slaughtered in front of them, and then they would feel very uncomfortable eating that animal. It would be weird. It would be very weird to eat a cow after you pet it, you knew it, you raised it, you fed it. You don't even want to see it slaughtered. That would be very, very uncomfortable. And if you saw it slaughtered, you'd be, I think, 99% of people, unless you live in that kind of society, and there are people like that in Papua and Indonesia, but if you don't, if you live in the city, if you live in Kuala Lumpur, you don't come into contact with that usually. And the same thing, of course, goes for Americans. And the reason is that we are living a lie, meaning we are living in a world where we don't see animals being killed. So it's very weird to us. And we keep that out of view because it's upsetting. To most people, just seeing an animal slaughtered would be a very upsetting spectacle. Okay? But that is because today, with our technology, we don't need to see the animal slaughtered, and they don't need to slaughter it in the cities because it's cheaper to raise it far away where real estate is much cheaper. Kuala Lumpur has some of the most expensive real estate in the world. So because of this, the sacrificial system sounds weird. But you need to know that it sounds weird because we're weird, not the Torah. Because until 100 years ago, it was your own livestock, your own chickens that you ate. I mean, it's something you would see in Bali today, something I would see in Papua. I've seen it, but normally people don't. So therefore, if it's a normal experience to slaughter an animal before you eat it, how about if you sin unintentionally, just instead of slaughtering it at home, you bring it to Jerusalem? So then the whole spectacle of blood and all these things is not there. Well, this is a daily event. If you want dinner, the chicken's in the backyard, pick the one you want and you slaughter it and you have it for dinner. No one would do that today unless you live in the country. They have that in Malaysia. If you live out in the villages, so that's how villagers live. But otherwise, that's not how people live. So therefore, realize that if you're slaughtering an animal in Jerusalem, just rather than at home, so what are you thinking to yourself? You're thinking, well, I am taking the material and raising it to the spiritual. It's something completely different. As I said, this word karban in his Hebrew and in Indonesian, I'm going to guess it's also Malay. The word comes from the Hebrew word karov, which means to come close. All of Judaism is about taking the physical and raising it to the spiritual. Instead of just slaughtering an animal just so you can enjoy a steak at home, which you're permitted to do, Deuteronomy 12. It's fine. But you raise the physical into the spiritual realm, so that's how you serve Hashem. Just like intimacy between a man and a woman. If she's consecrated to you and sanctified to you, so then it's a holy thing to be intimate with your wife. And therefore, it is raising the physical to the spiritual realm, which brings you closer to God, because it reminds you what we're here for. We are here to connect our souls to God. If you have a dog at home, it's very likely that you feel a lot in common with that dog. You know when you're eating dinner, the dog is watching you and he just wants a little bit of the food from your table, or a lot of it, as much as he can get. He wants a safe place to sleep. He wants to feel comfortable, and he wants to make babies. That's it. And it's not difficult to relate to a dog or a cat that people have as pets. The only thing is that these animals don't believe in God. They have no soul. They have no neshama. And therefore, we have that. And therefore, it is our whole purpose in our life is to connect the physical to the spiritual. And notice that all these animals, the head and the tail is on the same level on the horizontal plane. Only people walk standing up. Our mind, our consciousness, our neshama is here. It's not in our feet. God breathed into this that made us, create us in the image of God. This is where the Spirit of God entered into us. This is why this is a very intimate place. This is why people kiss each other here. Why kiss? And it's in Tanakh, because that's the soul, that's the essence. So the key is to take the physical and raise it to the spiritual. And when you bring an offering, it means that you're connecting the physical to the spiritual, which means you are undoing, you are eviscerating the very cause of unintentional sins, which is not caring and not paying attention to your actions.
Okay, well, that was interesting. However, it is completely and utterly false. Okay, there is absolutely nothing spiritual about killing an animal. Okay, I myself have killed animals. Maybe I can show you, actually. Yes, I can. Okay. Let's get that on. There we are. There's a pig kill. That was from, I think, 3 Christmases ago. Quite an experience. I was a vegetarian for 10 years before coming over here. And I decided that I would start eating meat again because, and I'll tell you why. I felt that the most I could do for harmonious living was to eat my own food. Okay? To eat my own food. And that way, there's our pigs and piglets. We don't keep them anymore. I'm back to being a vegetarian. But that was quite an experience, let me tell you. And look, the rabbi's not kidding. It's a very incredible and moving experience and humbling experience to harvest an animal. It's no small thing at all. It's a big thing, actually. You can feel the spirit departing the animal. You can feel it. A portal opens. Anytime something is killed, a portal opens. I found it in one way extremely liberating, and in another way extremely disturbing. And after this brief experiment, I went back to being a vegetarian, and I've been a vegetarian, about 12 years now. I drink milk, a little bit of milk, cheese, I eat eggs, but no fish, no fowl, no meat, no pork, no beef, no lamb, no goat, no meat, no fish, no chicken, no turkey, no pheasant. Okay? It's a very austere diet, and you have to be very cautious about where you make up your protein. So we eat a lot of beans here. A lot of beans over here. But let me try to explain to you what animal sacrifice really is in the universal spiritual context. The rabbis will tell you why they're doing it. I would suggest to you, at the risk of sounding arrogant, that they're either lying or they don't know. Okay? And I don't think they don't know. Let me be clear about that. I do not think that they don't know. Here's another religion that focuses on animal sacrifice.
Jacinto lives in Cuba and belongs to a secret sect called the Abacua. He is preparing for his initiation into Palo de Monte. This is the Cuban black magic of Bantu origin, imported by slaves brought here from Central Africa. In the scenario of the cult, there is a rudimentary altar called the prenda. This sacred place is filled with sacred earth, sticks, human bones, and other magical objects. Jacinto is led blindfolded to the altar, where the officiant will lay hands on him, strike different parts of his body, make painful cuts in his skin, and force him to drink a healing potion. Jacinto knows he is supported by an invisible source in this religious space, the presence of the spirits of the dead who act as a guide in his initiation. The blindfold is removed, and candlelight illuminates the way of the newest member of the Palo de Monte, whose dogma is based on the word of God the Creator, author of all that exists. But while most of the devotees of this religion have been baptized by the Catholic Church, at the same time they also practice sacrifices and abominable rites.
There you go, Palo Mayombe. And so the truth is, as strange as it may sound, that the blood and the energy of the dying creature in the ritual sacrifice is an energy offering to the other side, most often received by low astral entities. This is why you don't see blood sacrifice anywhere outside of blood magic or ritual magic for protection, whether it be voodoo, Santeria, Palo Mayombe, or the numerous forms of this magic they have in Africa and the Congo and all over. But somehow it's different when the rabbis do it in this special temple created just for animal sacrifice. The idea that all of life is working itself up to the human level, and that is achieved by their sacrificing themselves to us, not true. Simply not true. There is an evolutionary process. We're here for a long time. Billy Meyer material and the higher spiritual teachings on the planet have us going back. Average soul is on this planet about 8 billion years for the entire evolutionary process. Okay, that would be coming from minerals all the way up to human form. And then when you have human form, there's a very large number of human lives. Okay, it's not just 2 or 3 reincarnations. It's like Errol said, this system is like recycling, not reincarnating. This is the fall. Okay, this is the true fall. Blood offerings are always black magic. There is no God, no true creator, no monotheistic being, meaning above all else, the creator of all seen and unseen, that wants, needs, or asks human beings for blood. Black magic was given to the human race by another extraterrestrial race, which has also lived on this planet for a long time, and in some narratives is alleged to be indigenous to this planet, which may very well be true when you consider the dinosaur era. Black magic was given to the human race by the reptilians. The reptilians are a predatory race. Predation for human beings takes place in consciousness. It's true what the rabbis say, that we are outside the circle of nature, we stand above it, but it is not true to say everything below us is created to serve us. And if you think in that hierarchical way, very often you'll find the occult mindset for enslaving other human beings. The principle of occult study is always revolving around, pivoting off of the entrapment of a capable sentient species to do your bidding. That's what all the magicians are trying to do. That's what Crowley was trying to do. How is Solomon ever any different? How is it any different because it's written into these scriptures? So the spiritual battle that we perceive on the fourth dimension is in very many ways a battle between the Pleiadians and the reptilians. Most of you, when you hear the word reptilian, you might assume that this is an invention of a British writer named David Icke. Untrue. I repeat some points on my podcast because they're worth repeating. The shape-shifting reptilian narrative is perennial to the human experience. Buddha, in his sutras, writes extensively about the Naga, shape-shifting reptilian beings who can appear as human beings. He said that they were so prolific on the earth that literally every human being had encountered one, whether they knew it or not. They call them the Naga. Kabir talks about the egg-born sentient life on this planet. We're womb-born. He said there's another race of sentient beings that are egg-born. He's referring to the Naga. Okay? The human race is in many ways very deluded about what God is. Most people would accept any entity above them, even on the fourth dimension, as a god based on the present state of consciousness on this planet. In fact, most people on this planet do, whether they realize it or not. As you extend the theology into Christ, Christ pronounces himself the last blood offering. No more sacrifices. So the Son of Man sacrificed himself so a bunch of rabbis won't sacrifice animals anymore. That's the story. I'm not being disrespectful to Catholicism or to Judaism. That is the story. That is the theology. I'm giving you the exopolitical background. And it's real. It's absolutely real. Most people coming at this from a religious perspective, if you remember the game Paper, Scissors, Stone, they want to cover the stone of extraterrestrials with the paper of their religion and assert narrative dominance. Those aren't extraterrestrials. Those are demons. Tucker Carlson's on this bandwagon now. A lot of the Christian ministers have spoken to the UFO phenomenon and called it demonic. The interesting thing to note is the intersection of the UFO narrative and the religious narrative in 1947 through both Roswell and the acquisition of Israel. Let's take a look at that acquisition of Israel, because that is worth taking a look at. Oh, let's take here we go. It's going to take a spell.
The Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic, took place in Palestine in 1948, in which more than 750,000 Palestinians were forcefully displaced from their homes and pushed into refugee camps in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and neighboring countries. But the Nakba didn't end in 1948. The catastrophe continues to affect more than 12 million Palestinians, who remain stateless today. Historical Palestine was mostly made up of Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and a small number of Jews, who generally lived together peacefully. The persecution of Jews across Europe led them to believe that they were not safe there, and Zionists saw Palestine as a prime location for a Jewish homeland.
And it was clear that there were Palestinians on the land. Zionist leaders and common people alike got used to the idea that the only way of making Palestine a Jewish state is by causing the Palestinians to leave.
The Jewish Zionist movement began organizing immigration and buying land in Palestine. This was the first step in turning Palestine into a Jewish homeland. Then World War I began. Britain promised Zionist support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. This came as a formal political letter known today as the Balfour Declaration. It also included that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. When World War I ended and the Ottoman Empire was defeated, Britain occupied Palestine.
Britain provided the muscle under which they could simply emigrate. I mean, they couldn't have immigrated were it not for the British presence, because the crucial battle in the early stages was simply getting Jews into Palestine and acquiring land. They couldn't have done that without British government's sponsorship.
Jewish migration into Palestine continued for decades, and the Palestinian people organized large demonstrations against this influx. Palestinians saw British support of Zionism as biased and unfair. So the people of Palestine revolted in 1936 to fight against British and Zionist occupation. During the 3-year uprising, thousands of Palestinians were killed, and hundreds of British citizens and Jewish Zionists died as well. Britain dismantled the Palestinian Revolution, leaving them with no political or military leadership. However, the British also began limiting Jewish migration. This upset the Jews who had fought with the British during the uprising and led them to create their own forces. Zionist militias carried out bombing attacks against both the British and the Palestinians. As things got out of hand, the British announced in 1947 that they'd be ending their mandate on Palestine. The file on Palestine was then transferred to the UN, which suggested dividing Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state. As the British were preparing to leave, the new Jewish population began taking over, and it helped that they were heavily armed. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians began months before the British officially left Palestine. Zionists were taking over major cities and hundreds of villages, forcing thousands of Palestinians into neighboring countries.
It happened many times that the Israeli, very holy soldiers took 10 of the youngsters in the middle of the village, shot them just in order to kill them, in order that all the others will see it and run away. And if it's not enough, they took others also.
The British ended their mandate on May 14, 1948, leaving their tanks and armored weapons to the newly created State of Israel. From the time the British occupied Palestine in 1917 to when they left in 1948, the number of Jews is estimated to have multiplied 10 times to 500,000. As Zionist Jews declared the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, the surrounding Arab nations declared war, with the objective of liberating Palestine. Although Palestine had the support of other Arab nations and they outnumbered the Jewish population, the Israelis also had foreign military, political, and financial support.
They were a highly prepared, highly dedicated, well-armed fighting force, which was superior to all the Arab armies combined.
Israel grew beyond the UN partition lines during the Arab-Israeli War by destroying Arab villages and further reducing the Palestinian population. By April 1949, more than 500 villages and 10 cities were captured by the Israelis. Over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, and over 13,000 Palestinians had been killed. Even then, the Nakba did not end. Today, Israel occupies the whole of historical Palestine. Israelis continue to build illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territories. Palestinians in the West Bank live under military law, which subjects them to checkpoints, curfew.
All right, so you get the point. Now, what is it that I'm trying to demonstrate here? Okay. I think that the very worst thing that a human being could do is deliberately kill another human being in terms of sin. It's also the most egregious thing you can do in the criminal codes of most civilized countries, carrying the greatest penalty, 25 years to life for first-degree murder. All people who practice blood ritual inherit the violence of the ritual. It becomes a fetish, if you will. Occultists are very, very fetishistic. Occultism is the ultimate fetish. The occultist is always trying to entrap other beings from other dimensions, which could be done through ritual and blood offering, because if they accept the trade, they have to do something for you in return. And there's a language of communication between the spirit world and the practitioner. That's what the chalk drawings you saw were in the Palo Mayombe video. And coincidentally, it's a number-to-letter system like Gematria. Occultists are very hierarchical. Spiritual people are egalitarian. They don't really put themselves above anything. Anything. The entire life field is part of the God field. And there's no human requirement to sacrifice things. In fact, the exact opposite. And most religions do advocate that you don't eat meat when you're trying to be spiritual. Even if the religion doesn't advocate vegetarianism on the holy days, you don't eat meat. Even in the Catholic system, you're not supposed to eat meat on Fridays. Why? Why would God care what your diet is? And if he does, why wouldn't you adhere to it 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, if it was important to God? So 1947 becomes the year of the CIA from the OSS, Cynthia Crawford, the human-alien hybrid, coincidentally created in 47, the year of Roswell, the year of the Jewish ascension to control, or the preliminary stage to control, formal control of much of what is modern-day Israel. That was all done through violence. There were people living in homes, they'd been living there for generations, and they were gone in this Nakba, and they were slaughtered. Okay? So what I'm trying to point out in the book and in these podcasts is that these things are connected. The Temple of Solomon and the extraterrestrials are connected. The nuclear testing and the extraterrestrials are connected. And all of these strings, if you pull on them, and you pull the string and you follow the string to where it leads you, you will always find yourself in a cabal. You will always find yourself in some form of Kabbalist association, even if it's Gentile secret society Kabbalism, whether it be Masonry or Rosicrucianism or what have you. We'll continue on with 1947, and I will see you tomorrow. This has been Bruce McDonald on the Talamanca Review.